Hi, I'm Jenny Ray, the Managing Director of Management Consulted, and I'm back today to continue our series on case interviews. In particular, today we're doing another deep dive, one level down, talking about what consulting firms are looking for in case interviews. We've already talked about why they do case interviews, but this is a little bit different. In particular, every consulting firm that uses case interviews is looking for 3 specific traits in their interviewers to be displayed. Not only are we going to give a high-level view of each of these traits today, but we're actually going to devote separate videos to each one of them. So make sure that you stay tuned. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the first one. The first key trait that every case interviewer is looking for when you're sitting in the interviewee chair is structure. And when we're talking about structure, we're talking about some very specific things. In particular, we're talking about consistently presenting ideas in logical lists. And what I mean by this is that instead of talking in paragraph form and blabbering on about a whole bunch of different ideas, you're breaking things down into separate categories and then exploring each one of the categories in turn. There are different times that you do this inside the case, at the beginning of the case, throughout the case, and even at the end of the case. They're looking for the consistent use of structure. In fact, if you pay attention to the way that we've built this video and all of our videos, you'll notice that we have an underlying structure to it. That's a natural thing that consultants have. Sometimes you have to work hard to train it. Sometimes you'll find it really naturally. But in general, structure is super important. The second part of structure is that you manage the flow of a case with ease. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that as you're moving through the case, you naturally are not only starting at a certain place, but you're building bridges to the next place that you want to go. You're keeping in mind that the initial structure that you built, your framework at the beginning of the case, is really your game plan, your roadmap for the entire case as you're moving forward. So you're making sure that as you move from section to section, you're tying everything together and you're moving very fluidly throughout the case. The third part of structure is that you don't get confused. This may seem like a no-brainer. Of course you wouldn't want to be confused in a case interview, but it's actually hard to do when you're in charge. Many interviews, you will be in the driver's seat. You will be leading the interview. And so if you get confused about what the main issues are or how to tackle them, it'll really come across to the person who's sitting in the interviewer chair, who's role-playing as the client. So those are 3 things that are important to remember when we're thinking about structure. The next important trait that is evident from every future consultant is problem solving. Now let me break down problem solving into a couple of different categories. Problem solving means in one part that you're excellent at math. This is not only mental math, but also every calculation that you do. It's not only the actual breakdown of algebraic math, which is the most common type of math used in cases, but it's also interpreting data. So it's just the ability to use numbers to support your case. The second part of good problem solving is that you're quick to realize and correct mistakes. Ideally, throughout the case interview process, you won't make mistakes, but it's very unlikely that will actually happen. In fact, almost all of our clients that get top offers from MBB firms every year make at least one math mistake throughout the course of their process. It is absolutely not a deal breaker, but what is a deal breaker is if you don't realize that you made the mistake and you don't go back to fix it. The third piece is that you're adept at tying the data to overall conclusions. When I was talking previously about structure, I talked about tying each part of the case together. Well, it's really important that when you're doing problem solving, specifically the quantitative portions of the case, that you're able to tie everything back to the bigger picture. You're able to identify the so what of each situation. So make sure that you really understand how the data that you're interpreting fits into the bigger answer that you're looking for. And finally, you maintain a focus and an awareness on the hypothesis, if there is one, and make sure that you're driving to the solution. Every problem solving shouldn't just be a mental exercise. It's not a game and it's not a GMAT or a GRE question. You're not just trying to tickle your brain. You're trying to ultimately answer a question that the client has. You may have a hypothesis about what the answer is, or you may just understand what the core problem is that the client has, but you need to be sure that you are ready to go into the details and make sure that you're focused on driving all the way to the solution. The third, and probably the most important trait for all consultants, is communication. If you go back through the 2 pieces that we've already talked about, you could be really right on with structure, but it could be a little bit mechanical. You could be incredibly razor sharp with your problem solving, but it might be a little robotic. What all great consultants possess at the end of the day is the ability to communicate clearly and dynamically their ideas consistently throughout the case, whether they're doing creative questions or quantitative questions. So as we're breaking this down, there are a couple of key things that go into great communication. The first is that you provide concise and well-spoken responses to each question. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that each question is viewed as a separate entity. It's not the opportunity to rattle on. It's just something that you are addressing directly and then moving on. So it's very important that that's concise. A lot of people just make really key mistakes by talking too long for each question that they're asked in the case. The next thing that's important is that you work through difficulty with a positive attitude. It would be amazing for you to sit and watch over my shoulder as a number of different people walk through the case interview process. A lot of people just get frustrated, they throw their toys, or they demonstrate a bad attitude in the case interview process. Sure, it can be frustrating, but you cannot show that the frustration is getting to you. You have to show that you're invigorated by problems and that you rise to the challenge. Additionally, it's important that you convey that I would enjoy working with you and managing you as a candidate. This really is the ultimate question in every interviewer's mind. Would you be the type of candidate that they would really want on their team? And finally, and again, probably most importantly, in the most important bucket of communication is confidence. At the end of the day, if somebody is really good at all of these issues, but just lacks confidence and doesn't present their ideas well, it's very difficult to imagine putting them in front of a client to convey their same ideas. You may be hypercritical, you could be incredibly focused on what the right answer is, but if you're not able to ultimately convince the client that what you are proposing is a course of action they should take, you will never see your ideas implemented on the job. So these are the three key traits of all great consultants: structure, problem solving, and communication. If you've got more questions or you want to review how to communicate these things inside case interviews, we've got a great resource in our Case Interview Bible. We hope that you'll also join us on the website at managementconsulted.com for additional articles and videos.